see you. Ready for a deep dive today?
Always. What are we tackling?
We're going back in time, all the way to the 14th century.
Ooh, going way back. Sounds intriguing. Who are we digging into?
Ibn Khaldun and his Muqaddimah. I know. 14th century might sound like ancient history.
Well, before Google and all that.
Exactly. But trust me, this text is full of insights about civilizations, dynasties, power stuff that's still so relevant today.
You've got my attention.
Yes.
So what's the Muqaddimah all about?
At its core, it's like this deep dive into how civilizations rise and fall, those patterns.
Those patterns, right.
And what's fascinating is that a lot of what Khaldun talked about back then, it's like looking in a mirror.
A mirror? How so?
Well, we're talking businesses, nations, even social movements. The same forces he was talking about, they're shaping our world right now. It's like history is rhyming.
Totally. And one of the biggest things Khaldun hammers home is this idea of group feeling. He even has a special word for it in Arabic, Asabiyyah.
Asabiyyah. I like the sound of that. What does it mean, though?
It's like the glue that holds a group together,
Yeah.
that sense of purpose, shared loyalty, willingness to fight for a common goal.
Okay, so a sense of unity and purpose, that shared drive.
Exactly. He says it's basically the secret sauce for any dynasty that wants to rise to power.
So that drive to achieve something together is super important. Makes sense.
He uses examples like the early Muslims. They were totally outnumbered, but they conquered these massive empires.
Right. They clearly had that strong group feeling, that drive.
Or those Bedouin desert tribes. They were tough, able to take down much larger, more established societies. So it's not just about numbers. It's about that shared purpose, that intensity. I see where you're going with it.
And this is where it gets even more interesting. Khaldun connects it to religion.
Okay, religion, go on.
He saw religious fervor as this powerful intensifier of group feeling.
I mean, shared beliefs, especially when they're tied to something bigger than yourself, they can be very powerful.
Right. It can dissolve those internal rivalries and unite people towards that common goal.
So if you've got a dynasty that's just starting out, that kind of religious zeal can make them unstoppable.
Exactly. And there's always a but, right?
There's always a catch. What's Khaldun's catch?
Khaldun was smart enough to realize that religious propaganda on its own, it's not enough. It needs that fertile ground to grow.
So there needs to be that genuine pre-existing group feeling already there.
Yeah, otherwise it's like building a house on sand. It won't last.
So you need the strong foundation of shared identity and purpose first.
Okay, so let's say you've got that powerful group feeling, maybe even fueled by some religious zeal, and your dynasty is moving forward. What happens next?
Good question. What does Khaldun say? Does it last forever?
Well, not quite. He actually paints this picture of a 3-generation cycle. It goes from desert toughness to, how do you put it? Yes, sedentary culture, and then ultimately decline.
Desert toughness to sedentary culture to decline. So they get comfortable, things get easier, that's how it falls apart.
It's interesting. Khaldun believed that hardship, overcoming adversity, that's what forges that unbreakable bond.
Makes sense. When times are tough, you have to rely on each other.
But then as comfort creeps in, that shared struggle fades, the luxury comes in.
Yeah.
That edge can dull.
Comfort and luxury can make you a little soft, complacent.
And that shared glory, it starts giving way to individual ambition.
And that's when things start to break down.
It can. And the crazy thing is, it's not just some philosophical observation. Khaldun actually points out how a ruler will start by pushing away outsiders, right? Consolidating power. That makes sense.
Yeah, you have to secure your position.
But then as a dynasty ages, as that ruler gets comfortable, they start pushing away their own people.
Wait, what? Their own people. The ones who helped them rise to power.
The very same. Maybe out of fear or just wanting to maintain control. Who knows? But it's a recipe for disaster.
It's like a slippery slope. You push away the people you trust. Who do you have left?
You end up relying on these less reliable clients, people who are just in it for themselves.
And that's never a recipe for long-term stability. It's interesting. You mentioned monuments earlier. Weren't we talking about pyramids and those kinds of things?
Yes. The monuments. You can't talk about dynasties without talking about their monuments.
Exactly. They're like these physical representations of their power. You don't build a pyramid by accident.
It takes resources, coordination, a shared vision.
All that group feeling we were talking about.
Exactly. And Khaldun picks up on that. He says those grand structures, they're a reflection of a dynasty at its peak.
Makes sense. When they're at their most powerful, they have the resources and the will to build these incredible things.
But then as dynasties age, their focus starts to shift,
How so? What changes?
It goes inward. You see more lavish palaces being built, maybe opulent tombs, things that scream, look at me, rather than look at what we built together.
Ah, I see. A shift from collective achievement to individual glorification.
Yeah, and Khaldun saw that as a big warning sign.
And that takes us to another crucial point. Khaldun makes the dangers of injustice and greed.
Yeah, he was really clear about what happens when a ruler starts putting their own wealth and power above the well-being of the people.
And he's not just talking about a king being a little bit selfish. He means actions that directly harm the people.
So we're talking about real injustice here, actions with consequences. Give me an example. What kind of things did Khaldun have in mind?
Well, he specifically called out attacks on property as being really damaging. He said when people feel like what they've worked for, what they own, can be taken away at any moment, the whole system starts to break down.
Makes sense. Why bother striving? Why bother building anything if someone in power can just come along and take it from you?
Exactly. You get a collapse of incentive, people lose faith in the system and the economy. Well, it takes a nosedive.
So it's not just about morality, it's about the practical consequences of injustice.
Right, and here's the kicker. That economic ruin, it doesn't just impact the everyday folks. It comes back to bite the dynasty as well.
It's like that saying, cutting off your nose to spite your face.
Khaldun actually tells this really interesting story about the Persian king Bahram.
Okay, what happened with King Bahram?
Well, Bahram, he'd been giving away huge tract of farmland, but not to farmers, to his inner circle, guys who were just in it for the status. Naturally, they didn't care about the land, didn't know how to manage it. So what happens? The land goes to ruin, tax revenue dries up, and the whole kingdom is weakened, ripe for invasion.
Wow, it's a classic case of greed leading to downfall. And, it makes me think about what we were talking about earlier, about how these patterns, they repeat themselves.
Exactly. They're not just ancient history. We see echoes of this throughout history and even in modern times.
So are you saying we can see this happening today?
Absolutely. Think about, like, the Enron scandal.
Enron, that was huge.
Here you have this corporate giant, seemingly unstoppable, but look closer. Beneath the surface, unchecked greed, a culture of internal rivalry, blatant disregard for ethical conduct.
And it imploded.
It imploded spectacularly, cost investors billions, shook public trust in corporate America. And it's not just businesses.
You're right. Think about nations, countries that have succumbed to corruption, where leaders prioritize personal gain over the needs of their people.
Or even social movements that start with the best of intentions, but then lose their way.
They become more about power grabs than their original purpose. So knowing all of this, is there any way to break the cycle? I mean, it seems like Khaldun is saying decline is inevitable.
Well, it's interesting. Khaldun himself actually spent time exploring methods of predicting the future. He even looked into astrology and these ancient texts thought to hold prophetic knowledge. But here's the thing.
What's that?
Even while he was exploring those avenues, he remained somewhat skeptical.
So it's not about trying to pinpoint the exact date a company will go bankrupt or a nation will fall.
Right. Khaldun emphasizes that it's far more valuable to understand the underlying causes, the why behind the when.
If you can recognize the patterns, the warning signs, then you have a chance to course correct.
It's like that saying, those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it.
History has so much to teach us.
By studying history, by understanding the forces that have shaped civilizations for centuries, we can make better choices about the leaders we support, the companies we invest in, even the social movements we join.
As fascinating as all this is, I have to ask. We've been talking about the rise and fall of dynasties, these big historical forces. But how does this apply to me? I mean, we're just talking about one person. What can I really learn from some 14th century scholar writing about empires?
That's a great question. And it really gets to the heart of why Khaldun's work still resonates today. Because it's not just about kings and empires, it's about human nature. The same forces that shape the destinies of nations, they're playing out in our own lives every day.
Okay, I'm listening. Give me an example. How so?
Well, let's take that concept of group feeling we've been talking about. We all belong to different groups, right?
Yeah, our families, our communities, workplaces, all kinds of groups.
Exactly. And the strength of those bonds, the shared values, that sense of belonging, that's crucial, not just for dynasties, but for us as individuals, for our well-being, for our ability to thrive.
So if you're feeling isolated, disconnected, maybe that's a sign to invest more in those relationships. Find those communities, the ones that share your values, that give you that sense of purpose.
Right. It's about finding where you belong. And you know what else? Khaldun was really tuned into the cyclical nature of success.
Yeah, he talked about how hardship can create strength.
Right, and how too much comfort, too much luxury can lead to complacency. And you know what? We all go through ups and downs in life. The key is to learn from both, to stay humble, never stop striving for growth.
Makes sense. When we're going through tough times, we rely on each other, we dig deep. It reveals our resilience.
But when things are easy, we can get a little too comfortable, you know? We lose that edge.
And that's when we become vulnerable, as individuals, as societies.
Exactly. It's a good reminder to not let ourselves get too comfortable. So we've talked about group feeling, about the ups and downs of success. What about injustice and greed? Those were big warnings from Khaldun. What do they look like at a personal level?
Yeah, those are important too. How do we apply those in our own lives?
Well, I think Khaldun reminds us that we all play a part in building a just and equitable world. It's not just about those in power. It's about how we treat each other every day, how we engage with the world around us.
So speaking up against injustice, holding those in power accountable, that's important for a healthy society. And for each of us living a good life, a principled life.
Exactly. And then there's greed. Khaldun was really clear about how dangerous it is to put your own gain above everything else, above the well-being of the whole.
Right. We saw how that played out with rulers who were more interested in their own wealth and power than in serving their people.
And you know, it's not just about being a good person, although of course that's important, but it's also about recognizing that our own well-being, in the long run, is tied to the well-being of others. We're all connected.
So much wisdom packed into these writings from over 600 years ago. It's incredible how relevant it still feels today.
It's amazing, isn't it? Khaldun really did tap into something timeless, something fundamental about human nature, about the forces that shape our world.
He gave us this framework for understanding not just history, but our own lives, our relationships, our communities, our institutions.
And maybe the biggest takeaway is that we're not just along for the ride. We have agency, we have choices. By learning from the past, by understanding those patterns, we can actually shape a better future.
So next time you're facing a challenge, whether it's personal or at work or even thinking about the bigger picture, remember Ibn Khaldun. Remember what we learned about group feeling, about the cycles of success and decline, about the importance of justice and the dangers of greed, because this knowledge, well, it might just hold the key to navigating the challenges of our modern world. And that's a wrap on another deep dive. We hope you found this exploration of Ibn Khaldun as thought-provoking as we did. Until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep diving deep.